This conversation is brought to you with the kind compliments of CALL, that is, the Commonwealth of Learning. Gender inequality must be eradicated, and CALL is on a mission to help in its obliteration. It has embarked on a project to help young women and girls become motivated to pursue their fields of interest and build the future generation of leaders by launching the Commonwealth Wise Women project. This is a mentoring program that links girls from across the Commonwealth with mentors also from across the Commonwealth who are women in leadership roles with a story deserving of emulation. But CALL does not stop there. CALL is now taking that initiative further by creating this podcast series where I get the opportunity and privilege to interview some of these distinguished women and hear the path they took or the path that took them to leadership. COVID-19 has joined the long list of contributors to gender inequality, including globalization, technology, and climate change. But stay with us through this 10-episode series and hear how women have made their way over and around these hurdles. I am Dr. Ann A. Wallace, a higher education management and e-learning specialist, and I will be your host. Today's episode is titled Leading with Humility and Truth by Professor Rajani Naido. Welcome, Professor Naido.
Thank you very much. It's really lovely to be here.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce our audience to you by reading from your very impressive bio. So allow me to read this very exciting bio that you have. Rajani Naido is a professor of higher education and is the director of the International Center for Higher Education Management at the University of Bath. She has also been awarded a UNESCO Chair in Higher Education and Management and heads the Race Equality Task Force at the University of Bath. Before this, she was an inaugural staff member at a higher education institution that acted as a model for the transformation of higher education in South Africa. She has degrees from the universities of Cambridge, London, and KwaZulu-Natal. Her research focuses on transformations in global political economies and organizational change in universities. She has delivered keynotes at numerous international conferences in a wide range of countries, including Finland, Mexico, the United Kingdom, Ireland, South Africa, and Trinidad and Tobago. Her funded research has included higher education and social justice, social capital and regional development, and equitable transnational higher education partnerships. She has been appointed as expert advisor to numerous international bodies and has recently been an international reviewer for the Finnish Academy of Science. She was previously on the Executive Governing Council of the Society for Research in Higher Education. She is a member of the Research and Development Steering Committee of the European Foundation for Management Development and sits on the Executive Editorial Board of the British Journal of Sociology of Education and the International Journal of Sociology of Education, and numerous other journals. She is co-editor of a book series on global higher education and on African higher education. Professor Naido, wow. You hold so many prestigious positions, so that I am not even sure where to start. You're a professor in higher education management, you're an author of many works, you hold a UNESCO chair in higher education and management. So I would say to you that in the world of academia and intellectuality, you're a busybody.
Yes, probably too busy.
I would like us to start our discussion with you saying to our listeners what you do.
I'm a professor of higher education management at the School of Management. I'm director of the International Center for Higher Education Management, which is a multidisciplinary center which looks at how universities contribute to the global good. So we have a very large research program, and we also have a doctoral program in higher education management, which attracts participants from more than 50 countries. And I hold a UNESCO chair in higher education management, which brings all of that work together. And this year, I'm heading the Race Equality Task Force at the University of Bath.
Now, I noticed that a lot of your work relates to or was done in South Africa. And I also know that the name Naido is a good old South African name. Mm-hmm. Did you grow up in apartheid South Africa? And if so, could you tell us whether there were any challenges for a girl in education in that time in our history?
Yes, so I grew up in a very small town called Pietermaritzburg in South Africa. And at that time, there was, of course, apartheid, and South African society was racially classified and divided into the white community, people of Indian heritage, people who were mixed, and they were designated by the apartheid government as colored. And then people who were indigenous to South Africa, and they were designated as Black. And there was this very, very strict separation and unequal, very stratified hierarchy. So you lived, I had to live in an area designated for Indians. I had to go to an Indian school, transport, everything underpinned by law and very heavy penalties for breaking the law. And a very, very repressive society. So it was a police state, basically. And I think I always felt repressed in two ways. So within my own community, I lived in a pretty conservative community. And young women were not supposed to be, very mouthy. There was an idea of beauty that I didn't fit. There was an idea of how you are as a young woman that I didn't fit. I argued constantly. So I never felt that I fitted in very well into that community. And then, of course, there was the larger macro socio-political context of apartheid. But I was very fortunate that I had the privilege of going to a United World College in Swaziland, where when I was very young, I met people from all different countries and ethnicities and cultural groups, and that just transformed the way I saw people in general. And that was really very affirming for me. When I got back to South Africa, I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And there you really had people from different racial groups, different communities coming together to work against apartheid. And that was, I think, the first time, I really felt like I belonged somewhere. With sort of like-minded people, all very committed to change, and very energizing. So we were very young, so we worked very hard at our professional work. We worked hard at the politics for change, and we also partied. So it felt like a very full and good life.
Oh, great. That's very good. I could see from that kind of background, the grooming that has made you into the kind of leader that we've come to know. But tell me, at what point in that journey did you realize that you would indeed be a leader? Because that's what you are.
I don't think I ever saw myself as a leader. I always saw myself as somebody that was an outsider for a lot of my life. And I got to be quite comfortable with that position, because the more I tried to fit in, the more I couldn't fit in. And it made me feel unhappy within myself, and as if I didn't have enough courage to be who I wanted to be. And I think the first point where I really felt that I had led something, and it was quite a small episode, but but really important for me, is when I left the United World College, I came back to do my final year in South Africa. And I went straight back into quite a conservative Indian-only school where, you know, girls and boys were separated. We had the national curriculum, which was an apartheid curriculum. Although I have to say there were some amazing teachers who did absolutely courageous and brilliant work. And we decided to join the school's boycott against apartheid. So all the schools had decided to join the People's Movement. And I remember all of us kids, young people, going into the playground, just all walking out of the classroom. And I was part of the organizing group. And the headmaster arrived in the into the playground and moved towards us. And as he moved towards us, all of the students started moving back because it was quite a hierarchical, really strict school, huge amount of discipline, including corporal punishment. And I remember thinking, he is pushing us towards the fence. And once we get to the fence, there'll be no way in which we can move further. And he will send all of us back to the classroom. And so I just decided to stand my ground. And each time he moved closer, I just stayed standing still and I looked at him. And he then came really close up to me and said to me, "I will expel you if you don't move now." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not moving." And then I told him why we are boycotting classes. And then all the other students joined me. So I think it was at that moment that I thought, you can show resistance by example. You have to take all your courage in your hands and do it. But the impact of then bringing everyone else together with you is very powerful.
Now, I hope that our girls and young women listening take this in, take a moment to take your answer in. You have told us so much, bringing others with you, taking the risk of taking your own future into your own hands, and also showing that feeling that a lot of us get of not belonging at some time, it has a role to play in our development and arriving at leadership. Wonderful response. Thank you very much. Now, I know, well, we can all hear, and I happen to know that you are very highly focused and passionate about higher education. And I wonder what you would say to a young girl or young woman listening to us right now, who for one reason or another is considering dropping out of school.
I think I would want to know what the reasons are. You know, is it financial? Is it to support her family? Is it about violence in the school? What would be the reason? And I think I would try to persuade the young women to think about ways in which she can overcome those barriers. It's not hard, it's not very easy, it's very, very difficult in many, many situations. But I think I would say if there is any way to stay on at school, please do, because it gives you an education, of course, it gives you credentials, but it also makes you who you are. You have something when you go to school that nobody can take away from you. If you get a good and critical and sustaining education, you get something out of that you carry for the rest of your life. I remember my teachers that was so inspirational, and there were only one or two. And although I felt marginalized in my community and in the country, those teachers gave me the tools and the skills and the insights to believe in myself and to go forward in the journey through life. So I would say, please try to stay on, but find someone who will support you within the school and within the community who can inspire you, who can defend you, who can protect you, and who can guide you.
Great. So you're really saying seek out a mentor.
Yes.
Network.
Yes. Yeah. Or mentors, or
Mentors, yes.
Couple of people would be just really helpful.
That's good, but by all means, stay in school. I like that very much. I know that you have a very interesting view on competition. I was reading something that you had written, especially competition at the macro level in relation to higher education. But I was thinking that, competitiveness is dangled in front of our youth as a vehicle for success. And do you feel that young girls and women should be competitive amongst themselves as a means towards making it into leadership?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer, because absolutely everything that we see in society, cooking shows, it's who's the best cook, or everything. Just they're more and more kind of public entertainment, education's competitive, everything is competitive, and it's always as if the places at the top are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so young people are encouraged to position themselves in certain ways, to market themselves, to beat the competition. And I think that is a reality of the world that we live in. It was a reality of the world that I lived in as a young person as well. I had to apply for scholarships to study at university, and those were all competitive and merit-based. Mm-hmm. So I think we, have to work with young people to understand what the competition is and how to enhance their success in that competition, mm-hmm. Especially where we have young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. If you are a young girl from a rich family, you know what words to use and how to answer the question in a way that's critical but not too critical. If you're not from that sort of family, you don't have those skills that just come to you automatically. So how do we support our young people in those ways? But at the same time, I think we have to avoid competition becoming a huge part of us, where we are competing all the time for everything and against one another. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a huge role for loyalty, mm-hmm. for support, for networking. When I think about the team that I'm working with at the moment, mm-hmm. both at the university level as well as in the International Center for Higher Education Management, mm-hmm. one of the ways in which we've worked together and why we've been so successful is because we've really supported one another. And with all the programs that we run, the doctoral program in higher education management at the University of Bath, what's been amazing is all the participants who are senior managers that come onto that program also kind of imbibe this ethics of collaboration and support and development. And so that's really, really important. And it's also important to understand what you're competing for. Yes. There are some competitions that will just take the life out of you, that gives you absolutely nothing in return, but you feel you have to compete because you feel that's the way life is. And I think we have to interrogate that with young people and talk about collaboration and support and loyalty and other important aspects. So my critique of competition is it's become the way in which all of our lives are governed. And it's always seen as positive, the winner takes all, people who are at the top have entered a fair competition and they deserve to be there. And it's not true at all. We know that the richest people in societies are there because of intergenerational wealth, etc. They're not there purely by merit. And society shouldn't be segregated and segmented in that way.
Very good response. What you've really told our girls. I mean, you've told them a lot, but I will just nutshell it by saying that what you're saying is competition in and of itself is not a bad thing. It is how it is managed, and that we must be conscious of what we are competing towards, and humility, honesty, truth, integrity must still stand out. I thank you so much for saying that. You know, Professor Naido, we are in a world now where there are many female professors, make no doubt about that. Yet, whenever we hear Professor so-and-so, we think immediately the first thought is male. I'd like you to share with our girls what it is like for you as a female leader professor in what is a man's world.
Okay, so I maybe I should start with when I first entered higher education to work rather than as a student. And this was many, many years ago. So I was very much younger. Mm-hmm. But it was really difficult for me at the time because people kept imagining that I was a student. So and women professors as well. So I would have, people coming and looking at all of us and saying, oh, would the student like to answer the question or whatever? So, and it was, I think that was partially a result of both gender, but also not being white. Yeah. So that combination, and you almost feel that you have to prove yourself threefold, both as a woman and as someone who's not white. And there was, what was kind of interesting for me is that at that stage, there were lots of amazing women who supported me and they were just brilliant. But there were also other women who placed me in the position of that they were my mentors and they would guide me, develop me and support me. But once I started coming up the promotional ladder, the same woman couldn't quite understand that it was now time to recognize me or reward me. Because in their eyes, I was still that young woman that had come into the university in the first place. So they were, in a way, some of the biggest barriers to promotion for me. And I think young women will often get this said to them, that it's too soon for promotion, or you too young, or you need more experience. And sometimes that may be right, but at other times it's something about the people on the other side of the table not understanding that actually you don't need their nurturing and their support, and they need to let go. And they need to recognize who you are now. So in a way, of course, there were lots of issues with male colleagues. Often I would say something in a meeting and people would assume that it was a male professor that had said it, and he hadn't said it at all. But the male professor would be very silent and say nothing, just kind of accept the praise. Yes. And so I'm in a much better position now because I've learned how to handle those situations. So I went through a stage where I was very aggressive about it, and I would just say, like, why on earth do you feel he said it when he actually didn't? So quite aggressive. And I think that was an important phase for me to go through because it really strengthened me. But I'm now at the phase where I can say the same thing in a way that's much more polite, but still gets the message home. And I think I can do that more easily now. The barriers are still there, but not as massive as they were when I first started. And I think it's also, what young women or young lecturers need to really learn is often as women, we don't want to say what we've done or what we've achieved, because we don't want to show off. We don't have big egos. We don't want to be arrogant. And the problem with that is that then nobody knows what you've done. So instead of thinking about it as arrogant, what you should think about it is just letting people know what you've done. You know, if you've achieved this, if you've written this book, just tell people what you've done. And I think that's a way of avoiding that fear of showing off or being arrogant or, you know, all of that. But those two issues were difficult for me to overcome.
All right. Well, you know, I am so glad I asked you that question, because the number of things that came out of your response are phenomenal. I mean, you talk about the first thing is, my question was based on a stereotypical acceptance that a female encounters challenges from a male, but what you have told us is that it comes from all angles. And you've also told us that there are women who are well-meaning, and maybe so well-meaning they don't know when to stop. But you've also told us how you have used these experiences to develop yourself so that you can handle these situations. And I really want our listeners to take this on board. But I want to go back a little bit to the apartheid talk, because I know when it comes to apartheid, we can spend a whole week of interviews, but we're not going to do that today. But you know, this lady, Sheryl Sandberg, said in her book, Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead, she said that social gains are never handed out. They must be seized. And I just wonder if that is something you can relate to, coming from an apartheid background, and if you can explain that to our young listeners.
Yes, I think apartheid is a really nice example of that, because everything was a struggle, you know, trying to change the curriculum in schools. I remember going to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and the part of my course was English literature. And I went to the head of department and basically said, but we live in Africa, shouldn't we also have African literature? And he basically said to me, you will not get a job if you go along that route. You know, African literature is not really literature. And fortunately, there was a professor there called David Morn Brown, who had written about Kenyan literature and African literature in general. And he'd also developed really interesting ways of how to analyze literature in its social context. And he then developed an optional unit. And 90% of the students in my class attended his unit. So, you know, when I think about all the most meaningful parts of my life during the apartheid era, absolutely everything was a fight and a struggle. But it was a collective struggle. So, you know, with apartheid, there were when we had the people strike, it was mine workers, teachers, doctors, nurses. Absolutely everyone went on strike together to call for an end to apartheid. And that collective strength was incredibly important in achieving anything and in achieving social gains, especially when you're faced with a really violent state apparatus with a security force and an underground security force and so on. So, you know, there were many gains, many losses as well, a lot of tragedies, a lot of people lost their lives, a lot of people became mentally ill. It was a huge amount for young people to deal with. But there were a number of gains. And in the higher education institution, where I was an inaugural staff member, where we were trying to develop a new idea of university education, we had to work incredibly hard to do that, to work with the students, to develop a new curriculum, to keep as safe as possible within a state that didn't want racial integration. But in the end, I think, yes, you have to seize it, but you have to have a very realistic understanding of what the constraints are, what the dangers are, what the challenges are. And where you see an opportunity, I would say, just try. If there are not huge dangers for you, just try. And if you fail, you fail, but you've learned something. And I think, when I look back at my life, there were quite a few instances in my professional life where I didn't try because I just thought, I'm not sure if I will succeed, or am I good enough? Maybe there are people that are better than me. And so you stop yourself from, putting into place actions that may take you where you want to go, or that may actually create better opportunities for others as well.
Great. You see, you've told us now about how we overcome these things, how we seize, but we seize with strategy, we seize with a plan. You've also talked about what they call imposter syndrome, how as women we tend to feel this way, but it can be overcome and the social gains can be seized. But it was interesting that you talked about being a student of literature, and I know you're exceedingly well spoken, yet I have read that you refrain from using highbrow management language and highbrow leadership talk and organizational speak. Why is that?
Yes, I suppose because I really want to be able to communicate in a very direct way and in a very honest way with whoever I'm talking to. So, in all of my various roles, I'm talking to the senior leadership team, to students, to other academic and professional services staff, and to people in the city and the region, and to colleagues globally. And all of the, every social context that you are in has a different language. So even if you go across disciplines, there's a different language for mathematics and different way of talking in sociology. Different communities have different ways of talking. And I think I often find what I call management speak is often very empty. It's lots of slogans and lots of kind of language that looks impressive. But when you look behind those words, you kind of think, so that sounded really impressive, but what does it mean? And what does it mean we should do? What practical actions do we take now? And it's the same with my work on the Race Equality Task Force. I try not to kind of make overblown statements and make promises that I know I can't achieve. I'm really very honest with people. And I basically am very upfront with what are the barriers, what are the challenges, but I also promise them that I will try as hard as I can to overcome those barriers. And when you use language that's very high blown and not just, you can use normal language to talk about just about anything. Yeah. And I think that's what we should do.
Yeah, I like that very much. You really touched on one of the basic tenets of communication, and that is knowing your audience. And I like that. I like that very much. I've heard tell that, and I have been hearing it actually a lot, that many young aspiring professional women are shying away from exhibiting ambition because they feel that it's going to interfere with their family life. Could you tell us how you create a work-life balance?
Well, I think maybe just to to start up. I know when I was in school as a teenager, I tried to appear more stupid than I was because I was really, really worried that I wouldn't get a boyfriend. So, I thought I had to be try my best to let boys win the argument, or, all of that. And I kind of thought, if I can just get that right, then, boys will be really interested in me. And actually, at the time, there was that sort of sense of what an attractive girl should look like and be, and so on. And then I realized that I was getting absolutely nowhere with any of that. And so I just became myself. And I think it's, people worry about kind of being very, let's say, intellectual or caring a lot about their work. And I think we need to not feel guilty about that. Mm-hmm. So I would say that first, we can be leaders, we can be women who are very, very professionally focused. But at the same time, what I can say from my own private experience and my personal experience is that can eat away at your personal time, at your family time, and can eat away at your health because you work too long hours, too intensely. Mm-hmm. And achieving a balance for yourself is incredibly important. Mm. And I have really struggled with that hugely. And I now have had to set myself rules. Yeah. And, one rule is at 7 o'clock, I absolutely close down the computer. Mm-hmm. And then do not open it again unless I absolutely have to, until the next morning, maybe very early the next morning if I've got too much work. So I think we need to set rules for how do you manage and balance work and family. It's really important, really difficult. But I think what's very useful, for example, in our university, there's been a focus on well-being. Mm-hmm. Especially during the pandemic situation. And we're getting a lot of good modeling from the senior leadership team, mm-hmm. Okay. Where they are saying, take your leave. We will give you more time off now because the pandemic has been so intense. Everyone has had to work harder. But what started in the pandemic, I think, will continue. Mm. And if you have everybody modeling the importance of work-life balance, it may kind of filter down to everyone in a workplace or in a school.
And it'll catch on.
I hope so. Yeah, I haven't, I'm kind of very hesitant about giving advice in the sphere because I haven't really got it right yet.
But yes. Yes, I know what you mean. We'll be back after this short message. The Pathway to Female Leadership is brought to you with the kind compliments of the Commonwealth Wise Women project. Before we went to break, you were telling us how you see the work-life balance happening. You've also been, as is true to yourself, honest to tell us you haven't quite mastered it, but you're getting there. And I think that it is something that not just the young people listening to us who are our primary audience, but all female leaders need to understand that it is important to have this break. Now, Rajani, you and I are from originally the global South. So we have a lot of respect for culture and cultural mores. Yet it is recognized, and especially in the Commonwealth, that some cultural mores are being unjust to our young girls. Mm-hmm. Some of them are not allowed to get higher education. Some don't even get primary education. And what is of more concern, some of them are being made to become wives while they're still children. If the parents of such girls, or perhaps the guardians of such practices were listening to us, what would you say to them within the context of their culture that that would help to dissuade them from these practices?
Yeah, I think I would say, you know, your daughter or your is incredibly is an incredibly important gift to you, and how you nurture her and how you support her is very, very important for herself, for you, for the family, and for your community. Mm-hmm. And giving her the gift of education will equip her with all sorts of skills and opportunities that she would not get otherwise. Mm-hmm. And that will be fantastic for her, but also very good for you as parents and guardians, and for the community. And also, you know, to say that if your daughter achieves an education, it doesn't mean that she won't become a mother or a wife or any other aspect that's really important for the community. Women do all of these things, and they do these things well. Mm-hmm. And each one of those roles enhances other roles as well, because she'll then be able to do that for her children. Mm-hmm. And that creates really a form of sustainable human capital, social capital for the whole community.
Wonderful. Great. This is a question I ask all my guests, and I think the sentiment is clear. We need to look at our girls with a little more importance than perhaps we do. But coming back to something that I find very pleasurable, UNESCO chair. Mm-hmm. I remember when I graduated from the University of Bath, I was awarded a special recognition from the then UNESCO chair in higher education. And I thought, wow. And here I am speaking to the current chair. I want you to tell us, what is it like to be in such a position and to, you know, still be able to exude the kind of humility that you do? Do you allow yourself sometimes to fleet away and think, oh, wow, what an accomplishment? I want you to say it so that our young listeners can understand that they can get there. They can do this, and they can still be humble.
I suppose the UNESCO chair is really very, very important for the university as a whole. So it's a chair that is linked to the university, linked to the International Center for Higher Education Management. And part of the role of the chair is to bring together people from right across the university, the region, and globally, to look at the question of how higher education can contribute to the global good. Mm-hmm. So part of the program is a big program of research, including looking at the decolonization of education, how we can contribute to inclusive development, etc. But the doctoral program is a really big part of the UNESCO chair as well. That's about capacity building, especially the work we do in South Africa. But through the DBA, we have these amazing graduates like you, Anne, you know, all over the world that we connect to, we work with, that gives us a huge global significance and reach. And the UNESCO chair was, you know, as you were saying, Richard Mordaunt, and he's been amazingly supportive. So, you know, I suppose when I think about how I got here, I have to think about all the people who've done this before me, all the people who are walking the journey with me, like you, and all the people I collaborate with. So I honestly don't really feel that it's all my achievement. I think it's a collective achievement. I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. And the humility comes about because I think, when I look at people in NGOs fighting injustice or ensuring that people get medicines, or working in war zones, or doctors working and nurses working in the pandemic situation, I just can't imagine how we could not be humble. There are people doing courageous, amazing things, putting their lives in danger, working for next to nothing, doing some of the most important work on this planet, So I think I've been given really great opportunities to do the work that I love. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm really grateful that I work with the people that I do.
An attitude of gratitude is one we cannot overestimate. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Rajani Naido.
It's a pleasure, great pleasure to be here. Very nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Today, we have been talking with an outstanding leader, an intellectual, a charming and a caring woman who's at the top of her game, Professor Rajani Naido. And that's it. We have now come to the end of our journey of 10 episodes of Dynamic Women Across the Commonwealth. I am Dr. Ann A. Wallace, signing off until the next time. The Pathway to Female Leadership is brought to you with the kind compliments of the Commonwealth Wise Women Project.